Well, having regard to the issue of whether justice, the concept of justice, matters to international water cooperation, as a lawyer, I'm afraid I have to say that justice is an idea that doesn't mean a great deal to a lawyer. It's rather vague, obtuse, even nebulous. Lawyers prefer to talk in terms of equity. In the international sphere, equity is the fundamental rule or paradigm for interstate relations and interstate cooperation in respect of shared water resources. But equity is not synonymous with justice. Justice is a much broader concept. For that reason, it makes lawyers uncomfortable, if not even nervous. Equity, however, breaks down into a number of functions or into a number of parts, probably the most important of which, for the purposes of international water cooperation, is that of procedural equity. That all the actors, if we think about state actors, for states that share transboundary rivers and aquifers and lakes, that procedural equity requires that all parties have equal access to critical data, critical information, that each party has equal access to participatory processes, to engage in decisions and decision making and in negotiations over the use of those waters. Now, that sounds like something that should be relatively simple and straightforward, but of course it's not. States have different capacity, different ability, different professional and technical resources, simply a different capacity to engage. Therefore, there's room for inequity or injustice, if you prefer, in that regard. That's not an insurmountable problem. The international community can do a great deal by ensuring that the less capacitated states and other actors are assisted to meaningfully participate in decisions over international water resources. So the concept of justice is relevant at an ideational or aspirational level, but lawyers prefer to think in terms of equity. That has real concrete meaning for lawyers. An example of an injustice in international waters or transboundary waters, I think there are very many. In discussions earlier on today at this particular conference, many people talked about the Israeli-Palestinian situation, where by any measure it's quite clear that the Palestinian population in the occupied Palestinian territories are not receiving a fair share of what are shared water resources. The Nile has also been discussed. The hugely, grossly disproportionate share of Nile waters used by Egypt. This is becoming a problem as the upstream states are developing very rapidly and now have a need for that water and have the capacity to use more of the Nile waters. And again, this is a potential flashpoint. To the extent that that can be described as injustice, I think you probably wouldn't ask a lawyer. It could certainly be argued to be inequitable, that parties have not had a fair opportunity to put forward their case for the use of those resources, that a fair process, an equitable process, has not been put in place and executed. But there are many examples. Again, I struggle with the term justice and injustice terms, and therefore it's difficult to say definitively which situations might be described as leading to injustice. But certainly there is inequity. Well, to the extent that we accept that we can have an unjust situation, I suppose the forms of power that matter are the economic power, technical power, cultural power, the administrative and technical resources and diplomatic resources and political resources internationally to engage in processes, to design those processes, to influence those processes and to engage in them. Very often when we think of states as hegemons, they tend to have the resources that allow them to participate in a process that then looks equitable because it has all the bells and whistles, it has all the features broad participation, stakeholder consultation, and exchange of data. But some states are simply lack capacity. So I think that economic and technical power is probably the most significant. Of course, military power is important if the threat of force exists. But I think the key determinant of an imbalance will be sort of economic and therefore technical and diplomatic power. Well, as an international water lawyer, I would argue it can play much more than a limited role. It can play a very, very significant role. I hope I'm quoting the correct person. I think it was Malcolm Shaw, a very well-known international lawyer, described international law as a culture of communication. And in many ways, that's what international water law provides. It provides the language of cooperation. It provides a set of broadly accepted, normally tried and tested concepts, language, solutions, processes for developing dialogue, for exchanging critical information, for notifying other parties of major new developments, for consulting about those developments or about any other harms that are being caused, entering into detailed negotiations where that's necessary, and the conduct of those negotiations. All of these things are structured around broadly accepted paradigms of international law. Without these means of communication, it's very difficult to see how disputes and even conflicts can be avoided, let alone resolved. So yes, international law has a huge role to play here. And I've long felt, having consulted many parts of the world in this area, I've long felt that one major contribution that the international community can make is to develop and improve the capacity of decision makers and actors around the world to engage with processes and concepts of international water law. They're not perfect. They're constantly being improved, and they will continue to need improvement, but they really are the only means of effective, interstate communication, and indeed communication between states and their citizens.